to get discouraged, you think it's never going to work out.
Knowing that there is a move of God beyond
Good evening. It's Thursday. We're on live. Thanks for watching the program. Coming in late at 7:30, but on nonetheless. So this evening, actually, we've had the news of the week. Very depressing, of course, which is the shooting in Texas. Now, it wasn't a week ago, you had the shooting in Buffalo. I don't remember how many had died. I think 10. I may remember that incorrectly. So we have these mass shootings. They're evidently starting to pick up again. And, it's more depressing than normal when it's children, especially 19 children, because children are the most innocent among us. It is a terrible thing when anybody, children or adults, are murdered, shot down. So I thought we'd say a few things about this evening. But it really is, these shootings, a culture which sees them so often can become numb. I mean, we hear the shootings, and it's just kind of like, okay, another shooting. So the only way that you don't become numb, the only thing that keeps us really focusing on another shooting when we are so used to it is when it's this tragic. 19 children, elementary school children. Bad enough as it is when it's anybody. It is an evil. But, okay, so I want to talk about this evening because everybody wants to know. Everybody's talking about. That's what everybody's talking about. What do you do? We need to do something. That's what everybody's saying. That's what the politicians and the pundits and the talking heads on the news was. We got to do something. Well, let's talk about that this evening. And let's talk about it from a biblical perspective. Actually, what was it, a decade ago? I can't even remember now how long ago it was when you had the shooting of the, I think it was kindergarten children. And that was horrible enough. So, what I hear out there right now, mostly is, as far as solutions being offered, what most people are talking about in the news is, gun control of some type. Now, this is not a political show. This is not a show that we're going to discuss political views. We don't even focus here on the legality of issues. So, if we were talking about what everybody else is talking about, we could talk about the amendment, the Second Amendment. We could talk about gun rights and all this, but we don't really get into the legality of things. That's not what this show is about. But we are going to start here. You have people of one perspective. Generally, there may be others from another perspective talking about the same thing, but people from one perspective of a group of way of thinking. Let me just say a certain category of people in the culture that are saying we need more gun regulations and all this. And then you got some, generally speaking, on another perspective that is talking about things other than just more laws regulating the instruments that evil people use. And you could just take a political view and say, well, let me add to this from a political perspective. But that's not what we're going to do. Let's just say this. What if we had the ability to make all guns in this world vanish? That might do some good. And so when you talk about these solutions that people are offering, like gun control and gun regulation, generally you had to talk about it from either the perspective of, well, it's not legal, you can't do that, it's not constitutional, Or you talk about it just simply from a practical side of it. Does it work? How would it work? How would it have helped? Well, all I'm going to say is this for our discussion here this evening, is that whatever you do with guns, it is surface level issues. If you could pass laws that would regulate guns in some way, and it would help, and there was some benefit from that, okay, that's good. That would be good. But it's surface level. So we got one side of the culture that is just scratching surface stuff. They got no idea how to get into the depth of solution to this kind of thing. Now, there are others who I think are putting forward more practical things, but this is not a show about practicality of how to fix our culture with practical solutions and that kind of thing. Now, I have my opinions and what I believe would be practical views. But let's talk about deeper issues. The reality is what they're not focusing on. See, what we as Christians know, and we know this non-Christian culture is not obviously going to see this. But this is a culture of moral rot. We have a culture whose moral compass is all over the place. I mean, that thing is spinning all different kinds of directions. You know, a culture or a compass that is always spinning and never can find north is a broken, useless compass. It is a compass that is going to get you lost, and it is a compass that is going to get you into trouble. We have a culture of moral depravity and cultural rot. Now, we do have a segment of the culture that does want more moral issues. And that's good. I mean, we would be much worse, no doubt, if that wasn't the case. But there isn't any doubt about it that the part of our culture that embraces immorality, a lack of boundaries, selfishness, and hate is winning when it comes to influence. Well, so I have several things to say here. I'll say this from the beginning. Let's keep this. I'm going to somewhat of a short program this evening. I forgot to tell somebody we were on that was asking if I was going to be on. Let me do that right now. On now. Anyway, let's start here, though. I got several things to say, even if we're going to do a short one. But let me start here. Let me pull up Romans chapter 1. Now, what is that? Oh, there we go. Let me pull up Romans chapter 1. Now, this is a well-known passage. Paul is discussing the rejection of God in a culture. Most people say he's talking about the Gentile culture. Maybe. I'm not 100% convinced, because really his point has to do with Jews who also did commit idolatry. But that doesn't matter. We still get the point of what it is saying. I want to look at this. Let's see. Verse 18, he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them." There is an evidence of God in the reality of our existence. The very fact that we are all creation by His hands, the very nature of who we are, what we are, and the nature in which we exist is going to manifest God in some way. That's obvious. But it'll go on. "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, both His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse." Like here, it talks about His eternal power. It is self-evident in nature that it takes an all-powerful mind of some sort to create all of this, and He has to be intelligent, way beyond us. If we're intelligent, we can think that which brought us about has to be. Scientists, we speak very generally here. Scientists, like anybody else, have good information and they have flawed conclusions from good information as well. Atheist evolutionists who can't even build their foundation correct. They can't even get off the ground. How did life come here from non-life? They can't even figure that out. That's the foundation of what you would need, that foundation to build the house of evolution, and they don't even have the foundation. They said, we haven't figured out the foundation. Let's forget the foundation, figure that as we go. Let's build this whole house called evolution when you don't even have the foundation set yet. So we haven't even got evolutionists figuring that part out yet. But the very nature of things, intelligent design is one of my favorite arguments. If you look at a car engine as a product of intelligence, and what do you see in a car engine? You see various parts functioning together to make a system and an overall function. Well, if we see that as a product of intelligence, well, when we see that this exists in a universe, in a world, in an earth, far superior, it can't be compared. That is various parts working together as a system. Well, there isn't any doubt about it. I mean, it's a fool's errand to try to figure out some system that concludes anything else. So nature is going to manifest in some way nature's God. That's what he's talking about. Eternal power and divine nature is clearly seen in nature, being understood through what has been made so that they were without excuse. And I'll say it like this, there isn't anything that exists in the world. There's not a single thing you can point to. And is this about the Texas shooting? Yes, we're getting to that. There's not a single thing you can point to that is evidence, that is not more evidence for God than it is that there is not a God. But we got to move on to get to our point. And then it talks about them rejecting God. For even though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their thoughts and their foolish hearts were darkened. The more we reject God, the more we ignore him and the way we live our lives and how we build things, we are becoming more calloused and calloused, more dark and dark. Professing to be wise, they became fools. That's what happened to America. And exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image and the likeness of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. The reality is, what he's leading to is a culture that becomes more debased, more depraved, further and further into depravity they sink. We have a cultural rot going on in our culture, and it's heading more and more into that direction. Sometimes you see signs of life. But to get backwards, I don't have much confidence that that'll happen. Although God could make it happen, He knows how to bring a country to its knees for repentance, but He doesn't always do that. When you see shootings, and people are saying we need to do something, and you're just talking about regulating the instruments that evil people use, again, even if I were to grant, for sake of discussion, that might do some good, okay, well, I'm all about doing good. So for the sake of discussion, let's say, okay, more regulations on guns would do good. I'm not sure how that works. You could talk about those kinds of things. Personally, if you ask my personal opinion, I'm not yet convinced on how all that works. They say background checks, okay, but if you don't have a criminal record, what good does that do? So we could have those discussions, and people out there are having those discussions. But I want to get beyond that. This is a Bible program. So here's my point. You're scratching surface level stuff that doesn't do much. From what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I hear, the largest slaughter of school children, of people in a school, is from early 1900s, from a bomb of some type. So you're just trying to fix surface level things if you're just going after the instruments of evil people. You have a cultural rot going on in the country. That's the biggest problem. We'll talk more about that. But notice that this is what happens. So they committed idolatry. Both Jews and Gentiles fall into this category, by the way. Therefore, God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. When you reject God, you reject any real, consistent foundation for moral objectivity, and you can go anywhere. When you get rid of north, and you don't have a standard, your compass doesn't know what to do. It's all over the place. You could pick a spot and say, well, let's just make that north, but you can't be consistent with that. You're going to get lost, get further into the woods. You're going to go further and further into depravity. Well, our culture, rejecting God and his boundaries and embracing immoralities, well, we tend to embrace these sexual deviance in our culture. We have, we got the transgender culture. It was for homosexuality, and then when we embraced that and legalized that, as far to make it give them marriage rights of all things, then we had to go a step further. We had to keep falling into depravity. So we went into the whole LGBT community now. But the reality is, it's just going to keep going further. If the transgender and the LGBT community, as they say, keeps having its way and keeps getting embraced, once they have enough sufficient victories, it will keep taking steps further. They're already grooming children. They already have a war against our children and to bring our children into depravity. What else are they going to do to our children? I have no doubt if it keeps taking steps forward as they do into sexual deviancy, pedophilia is going to be one of the things in the future that is going to be embraced and fought for. And they're going to try to remove the stigma and tell you you're wrong. That's what happens in a culture, if God were even to allow that to happen. So they committed idolatry, and so it took their hearts in far away places. And that's what it talks about. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to an unfit mind. God allows people, and even cultures and societies, to give way to unfit minds, to do those things which are not proper, having been filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, violent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the unrighteous requirement of God that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them, like abortion. You kill children in the womb, you know that murderers deserve the death penalty. But instead, all we do is try to embrace them. We give approval. All these things is what our culture is being filled with. Violent, arrogant. Well, we got murder. When you have people going into school children and where they are and just slaughtering them and gunning them down, and adults that were murdered in this Texas school, it's because of a corruption of the mind. And you could have a great culture and still have individuals that become evil. I mean, it's always going to be that way. But when we have so much of it, and when it's going on all around us, you certainly are paving the way for it to happen. So those are going to be the real solutions, is trying to get a culture back to morality. Well, that's what Christians try to do, but Christians, you can't, James Page says, fake stolen religion. You can't steal what the Catholic Church provided and create your own fake religion. I'm not sure what you mean, James. You might have to explain that a little bit. I don't know what you mean by that. But what I'm talking about, Christians are not just trying to fix cultures. So it's not my point here, is to say, well, we as Christians need to keep trying to fix our culture. Well, I think that's part of what we do, because we try to bring light to a community. We try to bring light to a culture. But primarily, we're trying to win converts. We're trying to win people and have them surrender to Jesus for his kingdom. That's the ultimate goal. Not our culture, but his culture. Not our kingdom, not our government, but his government. America may fall. I mean, if America was to fall, well, that would be bad, because it's a better country than most. You might even say than any other. Although I would have liked to have been in Israel in their days, although the nation as a whole didn't always do too well. But as far as freedoms and liberties and the conditions for good life, America's got the top. It's at the top of that. But if America was to fall, that'd be bad. But ultimately, the most important thing in society is the society of those who have surrendered to Jesus Christ, his kingdom. That's the most important. It's more important than America. So what I'm trying to say is it's not our number one goal is to try to go out there and fix the culture, because you can fix the culture, but if you haven't won converts, that's the number one thing. But no doubt, we are to spread morality. God cares about justice in a culture as well. We got a lot of problems in our culture. Let's talk about this. So here's what we have. We have a society that embraces selfishness, that embraces a devaluing of human life and hate. Think about the big abortion topic going on. Abortion, and those who fight for it, is by definition, by nature, and is centered on extreme and the highest form of selfishness. Women, and sometimes men, right there along with them, who embrace and celebrate the right to sacrifice their own children for themselves. That's the height of selfishness. When women sacrifice their own children for the sake of themselves, that is selfishness. And it's half of our country is embracing this selfishness. Not just for the exceptions of rape and mother's life. No, they want to celebrate it. Notice all the arguments that they make. Okay, and by the way, my point is, when you have a culture that embraces selfishness and hatred and a devaluing of human life, it's no wonder you could have people go into a school and just gun down innocent children. It certainly paves the way. It certainly creates a platform for that, does it not? And the abortion advocates is just a large segment fighting for the right to commit the ultimate act of selfishness, which is to kill your own children for your own convenience. Because if you listen to their arguments, that's what it is. What do they say? And by the way, there are men right out there that are mimicking the same things. You're not going to tell me what to do with my body. What is the argument? It's of sheer selfishness. I want the right, for the sake of my body, to be able to kill my own child. So sacrifice my own children for my own autonomy. That's the height of selfishness. If you have them saying, I hear a lot of them saying, I'm just not ready to be a mother. I mean, I'm just not ready for it. I don't have the finances. What are they saying? Because I am not ready, because it's going to be hard on me, I will kill the child. He must die so that I could have an easier life. It will be difficult for me. I'll still be alive. He won't, but I will be. I mean, I'll be alive even if the child is born, but it's going to be a harder life, so he must die. Sacrifice the children for the sake of ourselves. It is the height of selfishness. That's what the abortion is all about. It's murder. And it's also devaluing human life. They know that that's ultimately what it's about, so they try to make it about something else, right? They try to devalue the children in the womb. Well, they call them fetuses. That's the fetus. I like how I saw some others talking about this. And the question you have to ask, if you're talking this discussion and they start calling it a fetus, you have to, I like the response I've heard. Say, fetus is just a Latin word that means baby. We don't have to speak Latin. We speak English around here. Why are you speaking Latin? Just keep saying that every time they say fetus. Yeah, we speak English here. Fetus just means baby. We could use the English word. They call it a clump of cells, as if nobody else is. It's all trying to devalue human life. We have leaders of society. We have governors. Northam, wasn't that his name? Who talked about if there's an attempted abortion and the child is born anyway, well, you can still kill him. Even after he's born, we try to make him comfortable until we kill him. This is the depravity and the moral rot we have going on, even in the leaders of our society. Selfishness, and that's hate, by the way. You know what hate is? There's emotional hate, and then but emotional hate is just a more narrow category of what hate really is. What is the ultimate root of hate? What is hate ultimately? Because most of us, when we talk about hate, we just think of this passion we have against somebody. We just want to lash out at them. We want to hurt them because we're so mad at them, and we just really, really dislike that person. Well, that's emotional hate. That's a symptom of hate, actually. But there's a more principle definition of hate, which is really most of the time what we're talking about with the Bible. You know what hate is? Hate is when you devalue a human who is made in the image of God. When you look at another person and you value who they are and their value, I don't mean their character. That they may have a bad character. They may be worthy of death when they do things worthy of death. But they're still human beings made in the image of God. When you devalue a human life, which is to say something about God, by the way, you know, when God gave the command of capital punishment to Noah after the flood, it said, when man or beast, by the way, kills a man, sheds man's blood, then you must kill him or that animal, because in the image of God, man was created. That's the principle. Because when you kill a man, you're talking about unjustly so, you're shedding someone made in the image of God. You're devaluing a human, and when you devalue a human being, you devalue the image of God. So it is rooted in devaluing human life. So here's the point. Think about the man who walks up to somebody at an ATM, a stranger that he's never met, and shoots them and takes their money. A stranger he doesn't have bad feelings for, right? He doesn't have any emotional feelings for that stranger that he just shot dead. So what do we think of that? We didn't hate him? No, actually, he did hate him. You know why? Because he devalued his life. When he shoots a stranger dead and takes his money, he's devaluing his life, the stranger's life, to the amount of money that he just took for him or from him. His life was worth no more than that money, actually less, because he was going to die so that the murderer could have that amount of money. Whatever the shooter in Texas was trying to gain, they're always trying to gain something. It's not mental illness. There's always some gain. We're not always sure what it is. Sometimes they'll tell us. Sometimes it might be just becoming a celebrity, getting your name out there, venting your rage maybe on strangers, even though they personally didn't do anything to you. When you do that, when he walks into that school and shoots a bunch of innocent children and adults, whatever he sought to gain was more important than all of their lives. He devalued their life. That is hate. We have a culture of hate. So there's a platform that makes all of this easy and promotes this kind of thing, and that's the abortion category, because you devalue human life. It's the ultimate devaluing of human life, which is to devalue them in the womb and shoot them. Not shoot them, I mean to kill them. Actually, shooting them would probably be an easier way for them to die than ripping apart their limbs or sticking something up there that will poke holes in their body, or pouring acid into the womb to burn them alive so that they will die. Shooting them probably an easier way to go if you could do it. They would do it if it wouldn't also harm the mother. So the only reason they don't do it is so, again, for the sacrifice of the mother. But it is a culture of hate, the devaluing of human life, not just emotional hate. And when you can look at your own children as an easy thing to get rid of for your own convenience, because you might have a hard life, that's hate. You're devaluing their life for convenience. Convenience becomes more valuable than their life. Convenience becomes more valuable than the mother's own children. An easier way of life becomes more valuable than the life of our own children. That's hate and the ultimate form of selfishness. History person says this country needs to return to God before it's everlasting too late. There is a judgment day to come. Yeah, the best we could do as Christians, no doubt, is try to win individuals into his kingdom. How about the LGB community and the transgender? It's also built on selfishness. Think about transgender. You must, for my sake, so that I'm not offended, so that I'm not bothered, use my pronouns that I prefer. That's selfish. It's self-centered. Me, 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 me. Even though you don't agree with it. So that I can feel good identifying as this thing, whatever it is that I identify as, you must use my pronouns because I'm going to be offended. You must do everything and you must bend backwards and go out of your way so that I am not bothered and offended. It is selfish culture. And now we got a war on children. Got a war on children. We're trying to groom them and to abuse them and to use them as instruments. That's what the LGBT and transgender community is doing. It's using children and the media that supports them as instruments to further their agenda. Remember I played not too long ago that Desmond is Amazing kid? Innocent child that is being used and exploited. The exploitation of children. State Farm, the insurance company, was doing it, and I think there was some backlash, if I understood correctly, and they stopped. We're exploiting children, abusing children. So the LGBT community is just another group and category that promotes self-centeredness and hate. I'll tell you something else. Besides what I mentioned, I may have time to mention it. Since we're a community that embraces a culture that embraces atheistic evolutionists, that's also a devaluing of human life. Listen, if you are nothing more than an advanced, it's always hard for me to say that statement, an advanced amoeba, well, you've just devalued human life. And I know atheists will try to defend that and say, no, absolutely. Ain't no way around it. You've got no long-term value and meaning to your life if evolution is true. There is no long-term meaning to your life, and there is no way around it. Sam Harris can make every effort he can to try to patch that over, but he can't. So, but beyond that, we got this thing in our culture now because we don't want to call things evil, and we don't want to give any credence to God or morality that centers in Him. And because if we get rid of God, we get no real objective standard for morality in the first place. We call everything mental illness. So, they will refer to these atrocities such as a mass shooting, mental illness. And we'll have this discussion about mental illness. No. How do you know it's mental illness? Now, I believe that people can have mental illness. Mental illness. If you got something wrong with your brain, you're going to have mental problems. Alzheimer's or dementia that the elderly get, there's something wrong that can be identified in the brain that breaks down, and you could have mental illness. Okay? You can have problems in the brain, but you know what? Those can be identified physically. But when you start talking about mental illness before you've even looked at somebody's brain, like somebody who maybe kills a mass shooter and dies, they haven't even looked at his brain, and already they're calling it and talking about mental illness in many cases. But you haven't even looked at his brain. How do you know what's wrong in there? They talk about, we got this thing, and it's part of the pseudoscience, I believe. I believe there's genuine science and genuine medical issues that have to do with mental illness. ADHD? No. They don't even know what it is. They just give you pills for ADHD. They don't know what's wrong in the brain. They can't identify something in the brain, so they just try to prescribe medicine that kind of helps. Actually, what we just simply need to do is discipline our children and get them to focus. That's what we do. Mental illness. Know what it is evil. But see, there's the problem, because they're reluctant to use the word evil because they don't even understand evil, understandably so. All right, the culture isn't going to understand evil because it's not a Christian culture. Even more understandably so because Christians don't do all that good of a job of explaining evil either. For most people, it's just, well, it's evil if the Bible's against it. And that's the best answer we can come up with. Well, if the Bible's against it, it is evil, but there's much more to it than that. You see, evil is actually rooted in nature, and it is rooted in realistic things that are extant in God's creation. Now, it is true there are things that are wrong, sinful, merely because God has commanded you not to do them, and would not be wrong had God not commanded you not to do it. So, for example, if God, in the Old Testament, if God commanded keeping of the Sabbath day, well, it was sinful and wrong not to keep the Sabbath on the seventh day because God commanded it. But if God never gave the command for the Jews to keep the Sabbath, well, it never would have been wrong. There isn't anything inherent in nature that says a man must rest on the seventh day. Yeah, we by nature need rest, but you could rest some other day. If he had never commanded people to pay tithes for the priest, not a Christian thing, then it never would have been wrong to not have paid tithes. See, there are things that are wrong only because God said not to do it. So if God were to say, hey, do not wear purple on Mondays, it would be sinful and it would be wrong to wear purple on Mondays only because he said to do it. It's rooted only in his command. And therefore, if he doesn't give the command, it's no longer wrong. But there are moral and ethics, morality and ethics that are rooted in something deeper than just simply that God said not to do them, which God also says not to do them because they are in fact evil. So for example, this is my common example, it is inherently wrong and immoral to cheat on your spouse. Why? Because God said not to do it? Well, actually God said not to do it because it is wrong by nature. You see, it is by nature immoral and therefore evil. You see, because it is rooted in the character of God. But see, that leads to this question, and I'm ultimately trying to define evil because our culture doesn't know what evil is. Christians don't do a good job of explaining what evil is. So that's what I'm getting at. So that's the question that is asked now, which is, well, wait a minute. If God tells you not to commit adultery because it's evil, then what determined it to be evil in the first place? What does God look to? Where does God look and find a law that says adultery is evil? So God is actually bound to some force outside of himself. And God looks at it and says, well, adultery is evil, therefore do not commit adultery. So there's some exterior thing to God that determines these things. No. See, the thing is that evil is rooted in God himself, in his character. His character determines the standard of what is good and evil. If something doesn't align with his character, it is by nature evil, and it can be detected as a bad thing in the very nature of our existence. You see, adultery is wrong because it is unfaithfulness, but God's character is faithful. He is a faithful God. Unfaithfulness, by its very nature, reflects contrary to his nature, and therefore that's why it doesn't work. It's not good. It's not good for a society. It leads to problems. When is unfaithfulness good? Except when you're being unfaithful to that which is already evil. If you have somebody telling you to commit murder and you're unfaithful to that person, but then you're being faithful and lining yourself back to what is good, you see. So unfaithfulness to your spouse and unfaithfulness to this commitment that you have made is by definition or by nature evil. It is by nature evil. That's why God, in fact, commands those things, or prohibits in this case. The taking of innocent life, which is what murder is always wrong by nature. Idolatry is inherently evil. To worship creation as if it is the creator is inherently backwards, and so it is inherently evil because it ignores God, and he, by nature, is the creator. God is honest, or dishonesty is evil because it is not in line with his character. You see, God doesn't look to something outside of himself to determine what evil is. It flows. It comes off of his character. His character never changes. It can't change. He is set in stone. He is who he is. And his character, whatever doesn't line up with it, is evil. God is loving by nature. So to walk into a school and slaughter a bunch of innocent people, it's a very unloving act, is evil by nature because it, doesn't reflect the character of God, who is by nature loving. Justice and wrath, by the way, is not contrary to love, as we all know. But this is not what that is, right? So society doesn't know what evil is. It thinks that Christianity is just presenting evil as just something the Bible doesn't like. The Bible, when it condemns something, condemns it for a reason. And the Bible uses wisdom and principles that reflect from God himself, the author of the Bible. See, God's ways are actually wiser than man's. We want to celebrate the LGBT community and abortion and all this. God's ways are much wiser. But you see, that's what evil is. Evil is not just some arbitrary thing. So, the idea is, I just lost my train of thought there. Well, you see, abortion, we had a member of Congress I saw, there's no need to use the name, because I don't want to make it political here if I don't need to. They were saying, they were for abortion, and they were saying, okay, this is a matter of religion. Keep your religion to yourself. If you don't want to get an abortion, don't get an abortion, but this is your religion. Keep your religion out of my life. Don't impose your religious views on mine. You know when they do that? That's what they're doing. They're taking a thing and saying it's not inherently bad. It's just wrong because you believe, or it's just wrong because your God said that it's wrong. But don't impose that on me. No, you see, that's what they don't understand. It's wrong because it is evil by nature. And why and what determines something to be evil? Because it does not align with God's character. To kill a child in the womb for the sake of your own convenience is by nature selfish, as I talked about, a devaluing of human life, and hate. Well, we all know those things are bad. Why? Because they do not reflect the character of God. I want you to think about this. I said a second ago that that which is evil is that which is rooted, or that which is good, I can say, is rooted in God's character. And that's what determines evil. So let me make this point. You know, people often ask, what is evil? And why did God create evil? Hey, if God created everything, why did he create evil? When you see, if you think about how I have defined what evil is, we can make sense of this. Evil is not a thing that exists. And it's not a tangible part of the material world. What do I mean? Well, evil is that which is contrary to God's character and goodness. It's not a thing existing in the world. So did God create all things? He created all the material world, that's right. But evil is not a material part of the material world. Let me give you a comparison. What is cold? If I ask you to define cold, how would you define it? What does it mean? What is coldness? How do you define cold? Well, in the HVAC business, I knew this before I became an HVAC worker, but something that becomes quite apparent is that cold is merely the absence of heat. Cold is the absence of something that actually does exist in the world. Heat is just energy. When you have an absence of energy, you have an absence of heat, and that absence of heat we call cold, but cold doesn't actually exist. It's not a thing that exists that you can grab a hold of, you can put under a microscope. No, it's merely the absence of something that does exist, heat. It's like saying, what is crooked? Crooked is just that which is not straight. So when we say that, did God create evil? No, he created all of the material world, and the way he left it upon creation, it was all good. It all lined up with his nature. But when free creatures, that's people and angels, who have the ability to choose and to make decisions contrary to his nature, contrary to his goodness, when they do that, that's what we identify as evil, but it's not an actual part of the material world. So what is evil? It is that which is contrary to God's character and goodness. So that's how we have to understand that. You may say those are deep things. Well, Christians, I think, need to do a better job of explaining those things. It's not really all that simple. I did it very easily with the cold and heat analogy. You could use the same thing with darkness. What is darkness? What is darkness? Darkness is the absence of light. You see, darkness does not actually exist. It's not a thing that exists anyway. The absence of light exists, but darkness is not an actual part of the material world. It's merely the absence of light in our eyes. That's what evil is. And so I said all that to say this. When you have people saying, well, don't impose your religious views on me. If you don't want an abortion, don't get an abortion. I'll get an abortion, though. They're treating it as if it is not inherently wrong, as if it's just this arbitrary religious regulation that you go by, like worshiping on the Sabbath, or what meats you have to eat. So that if God had just simply said something different, then you could do something different. No, this is evil because it does not reflect God's character of love, concern for another person, the value of human life. And where does human life get its value? And what makes human life valuable in the first place? It's reflection of God's image. That's it. That's the only thing that makes humans more valuable than animals. We may value ourselves more valuable than animals. Atheists may value themselves more than animals, even if they don't believe in God. But the reality is the only real value they have over animals is the image of God in them. And so you see from Romans 1, when you reject God, you have no objective moral standard. And so that's why our culture is all over the place with this morality. I mean, we got things all over the place when it comes to ethics and morality. And so we've always said this point: without God, you cannot have good and evil. That is, you cannot have objective good and evil, which is why when you reject God, they can go any direction and everywhere, as they have. Now, you can be an atheist, you cannot believe in God and still be good or evil. You can still believe in good and evil. Many atheists believe in good and evil. Many atheists will see the slaughter of 19 children and adults in Texas as an evil thing or a very bad thing. So you could reject God and still believe in good and evil. but you can't justify your belief in good and evil. Because when you reject God and you say something is good or bad, on what basis do you call it good or bad? If the slaughtering of 19 children is a bad thing for an atheist, because I do believe that atheists can be moral people in much respect, and let me be clear, in case people take my words out of context, I'm not saying if you're an atheist you're going to be a murderer or that you promote the killing of children. The implications of your worldview will justify, well, I say it like this, will take away any justification for thinking that's wrong. That's what I'm making a point about. So here's my point. An atheist may call, and many will, the slaughter of 19 children a bad thing. But based upon what? I just ask my atheist friends, what makes it evil? Well, you wouldn't use the word evil. What makes it bad? Because it's children. Okay, so 19 children were killed. I get it. We don't like that. It's very unpleasant. It makes us sad. It makes us angry. But what makes it bad? Well, because they're children. We go in circles, you go. You cannot find a justification for calling it bad. Well, so if you're an atheist, if there is no God, what's wrong with killing children? We may not like it. It may make us sad. But what makes it wrong? You see, when you say right and wrong, you have some standard in mind. What's the standard? Well, because they're children and we care about children. Well, we may care about them. A person may care about his ice cream, but if his ice cream is lost, if it falls on the ground, or if I take his ice cream, put it in the trash, he's lost his ice cream. He cared about it, but that doesn't mean it was morally wrong. You may say, well, you were stealing. Well, what if his ice cream, what if he puts his own ice cream down? What if he just drops it? You know, if you drop your ice cream on the sidewalk, you've lost your ice cream, but you have lost nothing moral. You know, it's not evil if you have killed an ant. This is probably better than the ice cream one. If you step on an ant or you swat a fly, you haven't done anything evil, even if it's just for your convenience. But what's the difference between the children other than your emotions? Emotionally, you may dislike the killing of children, but if there is no God, there's nothing that makes it morally wrong. What's the standard? Whatever promotes human well-being, that's what they'll say. If it doesn't promote human well-being, that's what defines wrong. No, not necessarily. I mean, why does the promotion of, what if I don't promote human well-being? What if I promote human ill and misery? What if I promote that? What makes that evil? You just came up with your standard, but that's your standard. You can't impose your standard on me because it's just your opinion. If the promotion of well-being, of human well-being, is your standard of good, it may not be mine. And there isn't anything that makes your standard any better than mine as far as good and evil. You see, without God, there is no good and evil. You may believe in good and evil if you don't believe in God, but you don't have a foundation to call good and evil. Now, the example we always use is Hitler. The extermination of 6 million Jews. Was that evil? They say, yeah. Well, what makes it evil if there's no God? Because it was the killing of 6 million Jews. Well, what makes that wrong? You may not like it, but we're not talking about what's pleasing to humans. We're not talking about what makes us feel good. We're not talking about what we like. We're talking about good and evil. So it may be sad that 6 million Jews died, were murdered. It may make us angry even. We may not like it. It may make us depressed. It may not be what we want. But what makes it evil? Nothing. You see, I have a foundation for calling it evil because it is the devaluing of human life and it is the murder of people that have value and a value that is rooted in God, something that doesn't change. You kill an ant, He has no eternal value. So there is such thing as good and evil. It's rooted in an objective standard that cannot change, and that's the character of God. But when you reject God, we have no objective moral standing. That's why our culture is in the pathetic nature that it is. And that's what enables and encourages and embraces people to go into communities or places and shoot people up. There are many other things we could talk about, like families not giving their children these very things. Atheistic evolution, which devalues human life. Listen, you say that if we're nothing but advanced amoebas, there is no eternal abiding meaning to our life. So if he goes into a school and shoots a bunch of children, he's made a bunch of people sad, a bunch of parents that are going to be sad for the rest of their lives. He's upset a culture or a society. But you know, he has not ended the life of anybody that has an abiding meaning. If eventually the sun goes out and dies out, which under atheistic evolution eventually it will, all of life on earth ceases to be, there will be no more meaning to any of the lives of those children that were shot dead. In fact, in just a few generations, they will be forgotten. They might be recorded. People may read them here and there and say, man, that was tragic. We may talk about it. 100 years from now, less. 200 years, less and less and less. And eventually they just become distant memories. No abiding meaning outside of God. And when the sun is out in the atheistic evolution worldview and the life on earth is done, that's it. Nothing ever mattered anymore. And so that takes away and promotes the devaluing of human life in the first place. And people like Richard Dawkins and those atheists, they know that. That's why they could write articles about how punishing a criminal for his criminal behavior is no different than beating a car when it doesn't work. Because it's just products of nature. When you got a culture that embraces evolution, abortion, at least half of it, and the LGBT community and the transgender community, which is absurd and ridiculous and has a war against our children, this all is a part of the problem. So the solution, if the culture wants to do anything, is promote everything that is contrary to that. The government can promote things. Here's what the government can do. A government can do three things. It can permit, it can prohibit, and it can promote. It can pass laws that prohibit things. It can not pass laws and thus permit things, and it can promote. It could say, here's a good thing to do. And it can send messages to the culture and the community and try to influence people to do things. I'm not talking about through deceit or manipulation or force or anything like that. That's tyranny. I'm talking about promoting things. Promote family values. You see, we have a culture that has disintegrated the family. I believe, if I hear correctly, that this shooter didn't have a father. We have all kinds of communities out there that are cultures that 80% or more are neighborhoods and communities that don't have fathers in the home. The the alphabet community is a culture that does not embrace the family. So when you break down the family, you break down a structure that promotes good in people. It's just, the solution is for the culture to do everything contrary to all that. Our job as Christians is to make these things known as well, talk about these things just as I have, and also, listen, you can't get the culture to change its ways. The culture is going to do unbelieving things. Here's what the culture is doing. Because the culture is an unbelieving society, in a secular society, it's going to do what you expect. You have things like this happen, and it runs around like a chicken with its head cut off, not knowing what in the world to do, because it doesn't have wisdom, because its moral objectivity is all over the place. So that's why it doesn't know what in the world to do. It's pulling out its hair, and they're fighting with themselves. And they think just pass more laws, that'll fix it. Why? Because it's an unbelieving community. Well, it's our job to try to help them. But our ultimate goal is, of course, not to fix the culture. If we could fix the culture, but if you don't win anybody to the kingdom of Christ, the culture isn't going to last forever. No matter what you do, America will not last forever. America and our culture is not going to be here forever. And when it is gone, there will be a kingdom still here, and it is the kingdom of Christ. If you have won people over to that, you have done everlasting good. That's what we're supposed to do as Christians. Win people over and have them surrender to King Jesus. Well, that's going to be my program for tonight. I appreciate you guys who watched. Sorry for the late arrival. Had a late work day. But I wish that we could get this message out. I may have more to say on this in later days, later weeks. But for now, pray for those families. We as Christians, we can pray for those families out there. It's a very depressing thing. A lot of parents without their children. Some parents, some people without their spouses. There were adults killed. So I don't pray that God can bring some good out of this, good, everlasting good, even to these families, somehow out of these things. God bless you.
Hosanna, Hosanna, forever we'll worship the King. Hosanna, Hosanna, forever we'll worship the King. Oh, measureless might, incomparable love.